I never imagined that a Tuesday morning in January would turn my quiet life in Maple Ridge, Colorado into a legal nightmare that would consume the next 6 months of my existence. But when I heard the sickening crunch of splintering wood followed by screeching tires at 7 in the morning, I knew my peaceful days were over. I bolted out of bed, my coffee still brewing in the kitchen, and rushed to the front window. What I saw made my stomach drop. My beautiful cedar fence, the one I had spent 3 weekends last summer building with my own hands, was completely demolished. Wooden planks were scattered across my front yard like kindling, and there, sitting in the middle of the destruction, was a silver Mercedes SUV with its front bumper crumpled like a tin can. I threw on a jacket over my pajamas and ran outside barefoot, the cold January air biting at my skin. The temperature had dropped below freezing overnight, and I could see patches of ice glittering on the road in the early morning sun. As I approached the vehicle, the driver's door opened, and out stepped Brenda Patterson, the president of our homeowners association and the most insufferable woman I had ever had the displeasure of knowing. Brenda was in her mid-50s, with short blonde hair that was always perfectly styled, and a perpetual look of disapproval etched into her features. She wore designer workout clothes that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and she held her phone in one hand like it was a weapon. "Yates Coleman," she said, my full name dripping from her lips like an accusation. "Look what your property has done to my vehicle." I stared at her in disbelief. "Excuse me, you just drove through my fence. Are you okay? Did you hit your head?" She waved her hand dismissively. "I am perfectly fine, no thanks to you. This road is a sheet of ice and you did not post any warning signs. I could have been killed." Warning signs? "Brenda, this is a public road. The county is responsible for that, not me. And more importantly, you just destroyed my fence." "Do you have insurance information?" Brenda's face flushed red, a color I had seen many times during HOA meetings when someone dared to question her authority. "I most certainly do have insurance, but I will not be using it. This accident was entirely your fault. You have a responsibility as a homeowner in this community to ensure the safety of your neighbors." I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache forming behind my eyes. "Brenda, I did not make it ice. It is winter in Colorado. It gets icy. You were clearly driving too fast for conditions." "How dare you?" she hissed, taking a step toward me. "I was driving perfectly reasonably, but when I reached your property the road became dangerously slick and there were no warning signs posted. That is negligence, Yates. Pure negligence." Other neighbors were starting to emerge from their houses now, drawn by the commotion. I saw Tom Martinez from across the street standing on his porch with his coffee mug, and elderly Mrs. Chen from next door peering through her curtains. "I am calling the police to file a report," I said firmly. "They can determine what happened here." "Good," Brenda snapped. "I was about to suggest the same thing, and I will be calling an emergency HOA meeting to discuss your violation of community standards." I wanted to argue that there was no HOA rule requiring homeowners to post ice warning signs on public roads, but I knew it was pointless. Brenda had a talent for twisting the HOA bylaws to fit whatever narrative she wanted. Instead, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. The dispatcher was calm and professional, taking down the details of the accident. She assured me that an officer would be there within 20 minutes. I hung up and turned back to Brenda, who was now photographing my destroyed fence from multiple angles with her phone. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Documenting the hazardous conditions on your property," she replied without looking up. "This fence was clearly unstable if my vehicle was able to demolish it so easily. That is another code violation." I felt my blood pressure rising. Your Mercedes SUV weighing several thousand pounds crashed into it. Of course it broke. That is what happens when cars hit wooden fences. Tom Martinez had crossed the street and was now standing next to me, surveying the damage. He was a retired contractor in his 60s, built like a bear, with a no-nonsense attitude that I had always appreciated. "Saw the whole thing from my kitchen window," Tom said, addressing both of us. "You were going at least 40 miles per hour down a residential street, Brenda. Speed limit is 25. You hit that patch of ice by the storm drain and lost control. Fence did not do anything to you. You did it to yourself." Brenda's eyes narrowed. "I was not speeding, and as a witness, you should remain neutral rather than taking sides with your friend." Tom snorted. "I am not taking sides. I am telling you what I saw, and I will tell the police the same thing when they get here." "We will see about that," Brenda said coldly. She turned her attention back to me. "I expect you to have this fence debris cleaned up by end of business today, Yates. It is an eyesore and violates Section 12 of the HOA guidelines regarding property maintenance." I could not help but laugh, a bitter sound that surprised even me. "You are unbelievable. You destroyed my fence and now you are demanding I clean it up by the end of the day. I have a job, Brenda. Some of us actually work for a living." That was a low blow, and I knew it. Brenda's husband, Richard, was a successful real estate developer, and she had not worked outside the home in decades. But I was too angry to care about being diplomatic. Her face went from red to purple. "How dare you speak to me that way? I volunteer my time to run this HOA, to maintain property values for everyone in this neighborhood, and this is the thanks I get. Disrespect and negligence." "Nobody asked you to run the HOA," Tom interjected. "You appointed yourself president and refused to hold elections for the past 6 years." "That is not true," Brenda sputtered. "There is simply no one else qualified or willing to take on the responsibility." The sound of sirens cut through the crisp morning air, and a Colorado State Patrol cruiser pulled up to the curb. A young officer stepped out, his breath visible in the cold air. His name tag read Officer Martinez, no relation to Tom as it turned out. "Good morning, folks," he said, pulling out a notepad. "I understand we have a single vehicle accident here. Anyone injured?" "No injuries," I said quickly. "But significant property damage to my fence." Officer Martinez surveyed the scene, taking in the destroyed fence, the damaged Mercedes, and the patches of ice on the road. He walked the area, taking photographs and measurements while Brenda hovered nearby, clearly waiting for an opportunity to state her case. "Madam, I am going to need you to step back and let me do my investigation," Officer Martinez said politely but firmly. Brenda huffed but complied, crossing her arms over her chest and glaring at me as if this was somehow all my fault. The officer spent about 15 minutes examining the scene, talking to Tom and taking statements from both Brenda and me. When he was finished, he handed Brenda a citation. "What is this?" she demanded, staring at the paper as if it might bite her. "That is a ticket for driving too fast for conditions, madam. The speed limit on this road is 25 miles per hour, and given the icy conditions this morning, you should have been driving slower than that. The witness statement indicates you were traveling well above the speed limit when you lost control." "This is outrageous," Brenda said, her voice rising. "I was not speeding, and what about the lack of warning signs? That is the real safety issue here." Officer Martinez shook his head. "This is a county-maintained road. Property owners are not responsible for posting ice warnings on public streets. That is the county's jurisdiction, and they typically only post signs in particularly hazardous areas. This is just normal winter conditions that drivers are expected to navigate safely." But I could have been killed, Brenda insisted. Madam, the best way to avoid accidents in winter conditions is to slow down and drive carefully. Based on the evidence and witness testimony, you were driving too fast for the conditions, lost control, and crashed into Mr. Coleman's fence. Your insurance should cover the damage to his property. Brenda looked like she wanted to argue further, but the officer's expression made it clear the conversation was over. She snatched the citation from his hand and stalked back to her vehicle, which was still drivable despite the front-end damage. After she drove away, Officer Martinez handed me a copy of the accident report. You should be fine to file a claim against her insurance. The report clearly indicates she was at fault. Get some estimates for the fence repair and submit them to her insurance company. I thanked him, and he drove off, leaving me standing in my front yard surveying the wreckage of my fence. Tom clapped me on the shoulder. That woman is going to make your life hell, he said matter-of-factly. She does not like being told she is wrong. I know, I sighed, but I am not going to let her bully me into accepting responsibility for something that was clearly her fault. Tom nodded approvingly. Good man. Let me know if you need any help rebuilding that fence. I still have my tools, and I could use the exercise. I spent the rest of that Tuesday calling fence contractors for estimates and contacting Brenda's insurance company to file a claim. The insurance representative was professional and sympathetic, assuring me that based on the police report, liability was clear, and they would cover the damages. But that was just the beginning of my troubles with Brenda Patterson. 2 days later, I received a certified letter from the HOA. Inside was a notice of violation, written in Brenda's distinctive tight cursive handwriting. According to the letter, I was in violation of multiple HOA rules, including failure to maintain my property in a safe condition, failure to post adequate warning signage, and failure to promptly remove debris from my yard. The letter demanded that I attend an emergency HOA meeting the following Monday evening to address these violations. I crumpled the letter in my fist, resisting the urge to throw it across the room. My girlfriend, Lisa Turner, who had been staying with me for the past few months, looked up from her laptop where she was working remotely. "What is wrong?" she asked, her green eyes filled with concern. Lisa was a paralegal at a law firm downtown, smart and level-headed, with long dark hair and a calming presence that I desperately needed at that moment. I handed her the crumpled letter, and she smoothed it out, reading it carefully. "This is ridiculous," she said after a moment. "She is clearly retaliating against you because the police found her at fault. You should document everything. Keep copies of all correspondence. Take photos of your property, and record the HOA meeting if Colorado is a one-party consent state." "Which it is," I confirmed. I had looked that up a few months ago during a previous HOA dispute involving my neighbor's choice of mailbox color. "Good," Lisa said. "Then record the meeting. If she tries to fine you or take any action against you, we will have evidence of her retaliation." The following Monday, I walked into the clubhouse where HOA meetings were held, my phone recording in my jacket pocket. The clubhouse was a renovated barn that the developer had converted into a community space, complete with a small kitchen, a meeting room, and a fitness area that nobody ever used. About 15 people were scattered throughout the room, which was more than usually attended these meetings. Word had clearly gotten around about the fence incident, and people were curious. I recognized most of them. Tom Martinez, Mrs. Chen, the Hendersons from the corner house, and several others I knew by sight if not by name. Brenda sat at the front of the room behind a folding table, looking every bit the petty tyrant she was. Next to her sat Gary Morrison, the HOA treasurer, a mild-mannered accountant in his 40s who always seemed uncomfortable during these meetings. On her other side was Patricia Reynolds, the HOA secretary, a woman in her 50s who followed Brenda around like a devoted puppy. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Brenda began, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We have some serious matters to discuss regarding community safety and property standards." She went on for about 10 minutes, discussing various neighborhood issues, most of which were trivial complaints about trash bins being visible from the street or someone's grass being a quarter-inch too long. Finally, she got to the main event. As many of you are aware, there was a serious accident last Tuesday morning involving dangerous conditions on Yates Coleman's property. This incident highlights a critical gap in our safety protocols and raises questions about whether certain homeowners are upholding their responsibilities to this community. I raised my hand. "Point of order, Brenda. The accident happened on a public road, not on my property. And the police report clearly states that you were at fault for driving too fast for conditions." Several people in the room murmured in agreement. Brenda's face tightened. "The police report is one perspective, Yates. But as members of this community, we must hold ourselves to a higher standard than what the law requires. Your failure to post warning signs created a dangerous situation. Again, I am not required to post warning signs on a county road," I said firmly. "That is not my responsibility, and it is not an HOA requirement." Brenda flipped through a binder on the table in front of her. "Actually, according to Section 7, subsection 3 of our bylaws, all homeowners must maintain their property in a manner that does not create a hazard to other residents. Your failure to warn drivers about the icy conditions constitutes such a hazard." I could not believe what I was hearing. "That section refers to things like maintaining trees so they do not fall on someone's house or keeping your walkways clear. It has nothing to do with posting signs on public roads." "That is your interpretation," Brenda said coldly. "The board interprets it differently." "What board?" Tom Martinez called out from the back of the room. "There has not been a board election in 6 years. It is just you and your 2 friends up there." Patricia Reynolds gasped as if Tom had said something scandalous. Gary Morrison just looked at his hands, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. "We operate under the existing board structure until such time as other qualified candidates step forward," Brenda said, her voice icy. "Now, if we can get back to the matter at hand. I am proposing that Yates be fined $500 for his violation, and that he be required to install warning signs at both ends of his property line, whenever weather conditions present a hazard." "This is insane," I said, standing up. "You crashed into my fence because you were speeding." "The police agreed. Your insurance agreed. And now you are trying to fine me for your mistake. This is retaliation, pure and simple." "I resent that accusation," Brenda said, though her eyes were blazing. "This has nothing to do with the accident and everything to do with maintaining community standards." "Then why did not this rule exist before last Tuesday?" I challenged. "Why are you suddenly interpreting the bylaws this way now?" Brenda had no good answer for that. Instead, she called for a vote among the board members. Gary Morrison abstained, looking miserable. Patricia Reynolds voted yes. Brenda voted yes. The fine was approved 2-0 with 1 abstention. "This is not over," I said as I walked out of the meeting. "You cannot just make up rules to punish people who stand up to you." Lisa was waiting for me at home, and I played her the recording of the meeting. She listened carefully, taking notes on her laptop. "This is textbook retaliation," she said when the recording finished. "And the fact that she is imposing fines based on a self-serving interpretation of vague bylaws is problematic. You should consult with an attorney. I do not want to spend thousands of dollars fighting an HOA fine, I groaned. You might not have to, Lisa said thoughtfully. Let me talk to some people at my firm. We have a real estate attorney who handles HOA disputes. She might be willing to give you some advice, maybe write a letter on your behalf. I agreed, and Lisa made some calls the next day. By Wednesday, she had connected me with Margaret Chen, a sharp attorney in her 30s who specialized in HOA disputes. Margaret agreed to review my case for a reduced fee, given that Lisa worked at the same firm. I met with Margaret at her office downtown, bringing copies of the police report, the HOA violation notice, the fine notice, and the recording of the meeting. She reviewed everything carefully, occasionally making notes or asking clarifying questions. This is pretty clear-cut, Margaret said finally. Miss Patterson is abusing her position as HOA president to retaliate against you for an accident she caused. The fine has no legitimate basis in the bylaws, and her interpretation is unreasonable. I can write a letter to the HOA disputing the fine and threatening legal action if they pursue it. What are the chances they will back down? I asked. Margaret shrugged. It depends on how reasonable they are. Some HOAs back down when they realize they are on shaky legal ground. Others dig in and fight. Based on what you have told me about Miss Patterson, I suspect she will dig in. She was right. Margaret sent a detailed letter to the HOA, laying out the legal issues with their fine and interpretation of the bylaws. She cited case law and pointed out that retaliatory actions by HOA boards are illegal in Colorado. She gave them 2 weeks to rescind the fine and withdraw the violation notice. Brenda responded with her own letter, written on HOA letterhead, refusing to rescind anything. She claimed that the board's interpretation of the bylaws was correct, and that my refusal to pay the fine would result in additional penalties, including potential liens against my property. She is bluffing, Margaret said when I showed her Brenda's response. She cannot just put a lien on your property for a bogus fine, but she can make your life miserable in other ways. Margaret was right about that too. Over the next few weeks, I received multiple violation notices from the HOA for increasingly petty infractions. My trash bins were supposedly visible from the street for more than 12 hours after collection day. My mailbox post needed repainting. My lawn had a bare patch that needed to be reseeded immediately, despite it being February and the ground being frozen. Each violation came with a fine. $50 here, $75 there. It added up quickly, and it was clear that Brenda was on a mission to punish me. But then something unexpected happened. I received a call from Gary Morrison, the HOA treasurer, asking if he could meet with me privately. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop in downtown Maple Ridge the following Saturday. Gary looked nervous when he arrived, glancing around as if he expected Brenda to materialize out of thin air. He ordered a coffee, and we sat at a corner table away from the other customers. "I need to tell you something," Gary said quietly, stirring his coffee without drinking it. "But you did not hear it from me." "Okay," I said cautiously. "Brenda is planning to sue you," he said. "She has been talking to a lawyer about filing a personal injury lawsuit claiming that your negligence caused the accident. She is saying she has been suffering from neck pain and anxiety since the crash." My stomach dropped. She told the police officer at the scene that she was fine. There were no injuries. "I know," Gary said, "but she is claiming now that the injuries did not manifest until later. Her lawyer apparently told her that she could sue for medical expenses, pain and suffering, and property damage to her car." "But her insurance is already paying for my fence," I said, confused. "How can she claim I am liable?" "I do not know the legal details," Gary admitted. "But I wanted to warn you because it is not right. You did not do anything wrong, and she is just trying to punish you for not backing down." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "If Brenda finds out, she will come after you too." Gary sighed heavily. "Because I am tired of the way she runs this HOA like it is her personal fiefdom. She bullies people, makes up rules on the fly, and retaliates against anyone who questions her. I have wanted to resign for months, but my wife keeps telling me to just keep my head down. But this is too much. What she is doing to you is wrong." I thanked Gary for the warning and immediately called Margaret Chen. She was not happy about the news. "Frivolous lawsuits are unfortunately common in HOA disputes," she said. "The good news is that you have documentation showing she was at fault, including the police report and witness testimony. The bad news is that you will still have to defend yourself, which means more legal fees." "Can I countersue for harassment?" I asked. "Possibly," Margaret said. "Let us wait and see if she actually files. Sometimes people threaten lawsuits but never follow through." Brenda followed through. 3 weeks after my conversation with Gary, I was served with a lawsuit. Brenda Patterson was suing me for $25,000, claiming negligence, emotional distress, and personal injury. According to the complaint, she had been suffering from severe neck pain, headaches, and anxiety since the accident, all caused by my failure to post adequate warning signs about icy road conditions. I sat at my kitchen table reading the lawsuit, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. Lisa read over my shoulder, her hand resting on my back. "This is absurd," she said. "She caused the accident. How can she sue you for it?" "Anyone can sue anyone for anything," I said bitterly. "Whether they win is another story." I forwarded the lawsuit to Margaret, and we scheduled a meeting to discuss strategy. Margaret was blunt about the situation. "This is a nuisance lawsuit designed to intimidate you into settling. She knows her case is weak, but she is banking on you not wanting to spend the money to fight it. My recommendation is that we file a motion to dismiss based on the police report and the lack of any legal basis for her claims. We should also file a counterclaim for abuse of process and seek attorney fees." "How much is this going to cost me?" I asked, dreading the answer. "If we can get it dismissed quickly, maybe $5,000. If it goes to trial, potentially $20,000 to $30,000. I felt sick. I did not have that kind of money lying around. My savings would be wiped out, and I might have to take out a loan to cover the legal fees. But I was not going to let Brenda win. "Do it," I said. "File the motion to dismiss and the counterclaim. I am not settling with her." Margaret nodded approvingly. "Good. Bullies like her count on people backing down. When someone stands up to them, they often fold." Over the next few months, the legal battle consumed my life. Margaret filed the motion to dismiss, arguing that Brenda's claims had no basis in law or fact. Brenda's attorney, a slick personal injury lawyer named Ronald Berkowitz, opposed the motion and demanded discovery, including depositions and document requests. The depositions were grueling. Ronald Berkowitz was aggressive and combative, trying to trip me up or get me to admit that I should have done something differently. But I stuck to the facts. It was a public road, I had no obligation to post warning signs, and Brenda had been driving too fast for conditions. Brenda's deposition was equally frustrating to watch. She claimed that her neck had been hurting since the day of the accident, but that she had been in shock and did not realize it until later. She claimed that she had been to multiple doctor appointments and physical therapy sessions, though she had conveniently not brought any medical records to the deposition. Margaret tore into her credibility, pointing out that she had told the police officer she was uninjured, and that there was no evidence in the accident report of any injuries. She also questioned Brenda about the HOA fines and whether they were retaliatory. "Absolutely not," Brenda said, her voice tight. "Mr. Coleman has been in violation of multiple HOA rules, and the fines are entirely appropriate. Is not it true that these violations were never enforced against any other homeowner until after the accident?" Margaret pressed. "That is because Mr. Coleman's violations were more egregious than others," Brenda replied smoothly. It was clear that Brenda had been coached by her attorney on how to answer, but Margaret had planted seeds of doubt about her credibility. The turning point came when Margaret subpoenaed Brenda's medical records. After some legal wrangling, Brenda was forced to produce them. Margaret called me as soon as she reviewed them. "You are not going to believe this," she said, and I could hear the excitement in her voice. Brenda did not see a doctor about her supposed neck injury until 3 weeks after the accident, and when she did, the doctor's notes say that she reported the pain started 2 days before the appointment, not on the day of the accident. She lied in her deposition. "Can we use that?" I asked. "Absolutely. Lying in a deposition is perjury. I am going to file an amended motion to dismiss and include the medical records as evidence that she fabricated her injury claim." Things moved quickly after that. The judge scheduled a hearing on the motion to dismiss, and both sides presented their arguments. Margaret was brilliant, methodically dismantling Brenda's case piece by piece. She presented the police report, Tom Martinez's witness statement, the officer's testimony that Brenda was at fault, and the medical records showing that Brenda had lied about when her injury occurred. Ronald Berkowitz tried to salvage the case, arguing that Brenda's memory of when the pain started might have been confused due to the trauma of the accident, but the judge was not buying it. "Miss Patterson," the judge said, looking over his reading glasses at Brenda, who was sitting next to her attorney, "your deposition testimony clearly stated that you began experiencing neck pain immediately after the accident. Your medical records contradict that statement. Do you have an explanation for this discrepancy?" Brenda looked flustered. "I may have been mistaken about the exact timing, Your Honor. The accident was very traumatic and the days afterward are a bit of a blur." The judge did not look convinced. "Miss Patterson, testimony under oath is a serious matter. If you are not certain of the facts, you should say so rather than making definitive statements that turn out to be false." He ruled from the bench, granting Margaret's motion to dismiss with prejudice, meaning Brenda could not refile the lawsuit. He also ordered Brenda to pay my attorney fees, finding that the lawsuit was frivolous and brought in bad faith. I wanted to cheer, but I maintained my composure. Brenda looked like she had been slapped. Her face was pale and her hands were clenched into fists on the table. Outside the courtroom, Margaret shook my hand. That was a complete victory. Not only did we get the case dismissed, but the court found it was frivolous. That is a strong foundation for your counterclaim against her. "You think she will appeal?" I asked. "She can try, but it is unlikely to succeed. The judge's ruling was based on her own contradictory statements and the clear evidence that she was at fault for the accident. An appellate court is not going to overturn that." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in months, I could breathe. But the story was not over yet. 2 weeks after the court hearing, I received another certified letter. This time it was not from Brenda personally, but from an attorney representing the HOA. The letter informed me that the HOA board had voted to place a lien on my property for unpaid fines totaling $3,000. I immediately called Margaret. "They are trying to put a lien on my house." Margaret sighed. "Of course they are. They are escalating because they lost in court." "Forward me the letter, and I will respond." Margaret sent a cease and desist letter to the HOA and their attorney, arguing that the fines were invalid and retaliatory. She also threatened to file a separate lawsuit against the HOA for harassment and abuse of process. The HOA's attorney responded by doubling down. They claimed that the fines were legitimate and that the HOA had the authority under Colorado law to place liens on properties for unpaid assessments and fines. Technically, they are right that HOAs can place liens, Margaret explained during a phone call. But the fines have to be valid in the first place. Since these are clearly retaliatory and based on unreasonable interpretations of the bylaws, the lien would be improper. But to stop it, we are probably going to have to file suit against the HOA. How much will that cost? I asked wearily. Less than you think. We can probably get this resolved quickly, especially given the judge's findings in the previous case, and we can seek attorney fees again if we win. I authorized Margaret to file suit. The complaint named the HOA, Brenda Patterson individually, and Patricia Reynolds as defendants. It alleged harassment, retaliation, abuse of process, and violations of Colorado HOA laws. We sought an injunction preventing the lien, removal of Brenda and Patricia from the HOA board, and attorney fees. The lawsuit sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. Several homeowners reached out to me expressing support and sharing their own horror stories about Brenda's reign as HOA president. Apparently, I was not the only one who had been targeted with spurious fines and violations. Tom Martinez and 3 other homeowners agreed to submit affidavits for my case, detailing their own experiences with Brenda's retaliatory tactics. Their statements painted a picture of an HOA president who wielded power like a weapon, punishing anyone who dared to disagree with her. The HOA's attorney tried to get the case dismissed, but the judge denied the motion. Discovery proceeded, and it became clear that Brenda had been operating the HOA like her personal kingdom for years. Financial records showed that she had been spending HOA funds on questionable expenses, including lavish dinners that she claimed were board meetings and expensive landscaping for her own property that she claimed benefited the entire community. Gary Morrison, the treasurer, was subpoenaed to testify about the HOA's finances. He looked relieved to finally be able to tell the truth. Under oath, he testified that Brenda had pressured him to approve expenses that he thought were inappropriate, and that she had threatened to have him removed from the board if he did not comply. She told me that nobody would believe me if I said anything, because I was just the treasurer and she was the president, Gary testified. She said she had friends in the county government, and that she could make my life very difficult if I caused problems. Patricia Reynolds, the secretary, was less cooperative. She maintained that Brenda had done nothing wrong and that all the fines and expenses were appropriate. But under cross-examination by Margaret, Patricia admitted that she and Brenda were close friends and that she had never voted against Brenda on any issue in 6 years. "So you rubber-stamped every decision Miss Patterson made?" Margaret asked. "I trusted her judgment," Patricia replied stiffly. "Even when that judgment involved fining a homeowner for violations that no other homeowner had ever been cited for." Patricia had no good answer for that. The trial lasted 3 days. Margaret presented a compelling case that Brenda had abused her position as HOA president to retaliate against me, and that the fines were invalid. She showed how the bylaws had been twisted to fit Brenda's vendetta, and how other homeowners had been subjected to similar treatment when they questioned her authority. The HOA's attorney tried to argue that the board had broad discretion to interpret and enforce the bylaws, and that homeowners who did not like the decisions could run for the board themselves. But Margaret pointed out that there had not been a legitimate board election in 6 years, and that Brenda had effectively appointed herself president for life. The judge in this case, Judge Rebecca Sullivan, was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s with a reputation for not tolerating nonsense. She listened carefully to all the testimony and reviewed all the exhibits. When it came time for closing arguments, she asked pointed questions of both attorneys. "Counsel for the HOA," Judge Sullivan said, addressing the HOA's attorney. "Can you cite any case law supporting the proposition that an HOA president can unilaterally impose fines based on interpretations of bylaws that have never been applied to any other homeowner?" The attorney fumbled for an answer. "Your Honor, the board has discretion to interpret the bylaws as it sees fit." "That was not my question," the judge said sharply. "I asked for case law. Do you have any? Not specifically on point, Your Honor, but the principle of board discretion is well established." Judge Sullivan did not look impressed. She turned to Margaret. "Counsel for the plaintiff, you have alleged that Miss Patterson committed fraud and engaged in financial improprieties. What specific evidence do you have of that?" Margaret stood and methodically went through the financial records, pointing out expense after expense that appeared to be personal rather than HOA-related. She highlighted a $5,000 payment to a landscaping company that had worked exclusively on Brenda's property, and a series of restaurant bills totaling thousands of dollars for alleged board meetings that no other board members recalled attending. Judge Sullivan took the case under advisement and issued her ruling 2 weeks later. It was a complete vindication. The judge found that Brenda had engaged in a pattern of retaliation against me and other homeowners who questioned her authority. She found that the fines were invalid and ordered them removed from my account. She permanently enjoined the HOA from placing a lien on my property for those fines, but the judge went further. She found that Brenda had misused HOA funds for personal benefit, and that her actions constituted breach of fiduciary duty. The judge ordered Brenda to reimburse the HOA for all improper expenses, a total of nearly $15,000. The judge also ordered that a special election be held within 60 days to elect a new HOA board, and that Brenda and Patricia were barred from serving on the board for 5 years. Finally, the judge awarded me attorney fees in the amount of $12,000 to be paid jointly by Brenda and the HOA. I was ecstatic. Lisa hugged me when I called her with the news, and that evening we celebrated with a nice dinner at our favorite Italian restaurant in downtown Maple Ridge. But the celebration was short-lived. 3 days after the judge's ruling, I received a call from Detective Sarah Williams of the Maple Ridge Police Department. She asked if I could come to the station to answer some questions about the HOA lawsuit. I was confused but agreed. I brought Margaret with me, not sure what this was about. Detective Williams was a serious woman in her late 30s with short brown hair and sharp eyes. She invited us into a conference room and closed the door. "Mr. Coleman, I want to thank you for coming in," she said. "We have been investigating some financial irregularities related to your HOA, and your lawsuit brought several issues to our attention." "What kind of irregularities?" Margaret asked. Detective Williams pulled out a file folder. "Based on the financial records submitted in your case, we began looking into Miss Patterson's handling of HOA funds. What we found goes beyond the improper expenses the judge identified. We believe Miss Patterson has been embezzling from the HOA for several years." My jaw dropped. "Embezzling? How much are we talking about?" "Our preliminary investigation suggests at least $60,000 over a 4-year period. She created fake invoices from vendors, inflated actual expenses, and paid herself consulting fees that were never authorized by the board. Mr. Morrison, the treasurer, has been cooperating with our investigation and has provided documentation showing a pattern of financial misconduct. Is she going to be arrested? I asked. We are building our case now, Detective Williams said. We need to make sure we have all the evidence before we move forward. But yes, we anticipate filing criminal charges for embezzlement and theft. Margaret and I left the police station in a daze. What had started as a dispute over a broken fence had uncovered years of financial crimes. The following week, Brenda Patterson was arrested at her home. The local newspaper ran a story about it, and the neighborhood was abuzz with gossip. Apparently, Brenda had been living well beyond her husband's means, funding a lifestyle of expensive trips, designer clothes, and luxury goods with money stolen from the HOA. Her husband, Richard, filed for divorce almost immediately, claiming he had no knowledge of her criminal activities. Whether that was true or not, I had no idea, but I did not feel particularly sorry for him. Brenda was charged with multiple counts of theft, embezzlement, and fraud. She pleaded not guilty and hired a criminal defense attorney, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. Gary Morrison testified at the preliminary hearing about how Brenda had pressured him to sign checks and approve expenses without proper documentation. In the end, Brenda took a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to felony theft and was sentenced to 3 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, which meant selling her house and most of her assets. The special election for the HOA board was held as ordered by Judge Sullivan. Tom Martinez ran for president and won easily. Several other reasonable, level-headed neighbors were elected to the board, and the first thing they did was vote to amend the bylaws to require regular elections and limit the president's authority. As for my fence, Brenda's insurance had paid for the repairs months earlier, and Tom had helped me rebuild it over a couple of weekends. It looked even better than the original, and I made sure to use pressure-treated lumber that would last for decades. Lisa and I got engaged 6 months after the legal saga ended. We decided to stay in the house in Maple Ridge, despite everything that had happened. The neighborhood was better without Brenda's toxic influence, and with Tom running the HOA, it actually felt like a community rather than a dictatorship. I never did post ice warning signs on the public road in front of my house. I figured the county could handle that if they wanted to. And whenever winter came around and the roads got icy, I drove slowly and carefully, the way you are supposed to. One evening, about a year after Brenda's arrest, I was sitting on my front porch with Lisa, watching the sunset paint the Colorado sky in shades of orange and pink. Tom walked over from across the street, carrying 3 beers. "Thought you two might want one of these," he said, handing us each a bottle. We clinked bottles and sat in comfortable silence for a moment. "You know," Tom said eventually, "I have lived in this neighborhood for 20 years, and the last year has been the best it has ever been. No more ridiculous fines, no more power trips, no more drama, just neighbors being neighbors." "I will drink to that," Lisa said, raising her bottle. I thought about everything that had happened. The fence, the lawsuit, the HOA battle, the criminal investigation. It had been exhausting and expensive, and there were times when I wondered if it was worth fighting. But in the end, standing up to a bully had not just helped me. It had helped the entire neighborhood. "You ever regret not just paying the fines and moving on?" Tom asked, as if reading my mind. I shook my head. "Not for a second. Some things are worth fighting for." The 3 of us sat there on the porch, watching the sun dip below the mountains, and I felt a sense of peace that I had not felt in over a year. The nightmare was finally over, and life could get back to normal. Well, as normal as life in an HOA neighborhood could ever be. A few months later, I was cleaning out my home office when I came across the original violation notice Brenda had sent me, the one demanding I post ice warning signs and fining me $500. I almost threw it away, but then I decided to keep it. I framed it and hung it on the wall of my garage, right next to the new fence I had built. It served as a reminder that standing up for yourself, even when it is hard and expensive, is always the right choice. Lisa thought it was a weird thing to frame, but she understood. She had been there through all of it, supporting me through depositions and hearings and sleepless nights worrying about legal bills. Her job as a paralegal had been invaluable, not just for the legal connections, but for helping me understand the process and stay calm when everything felt overwhelming. The HOA under Tom's leadership was like night and day compared to Brenda's regime. Board meetings were actually productive, focused on real issues like road maintenance and snow removal, rather than petty complaints about mailbox colors. The bylaws were updated to be clear and reasonable, with an emphasis on maintaining property values without micromanaging every aspect of homeowners' lives. Gary Morrison stayed on as treasurer, and he was actually able to do his job properly now. He implemented proper financial controls and reporting, and the HOA's finances were healthier than they had been in years. It turned out that when you were not embezzling thousands of dollars, the HOA assessments could actually cover necessary expenses with money left over. Patricia Reynolds resigned from the board shortly after Brenda's arrest. She moved out of the neighborhood a few months later, unable to face the judgment and gossip from neighbors who now knew she had enabled Brenda's behavior for years. I did not feel particularly bad about that. She had had multiple opportunities to do the right thing, and she had chosen loyalty to a friend over her responsibility to the community. The legal bills had been substantial, even with the attorney fees I had recovered. But Margaret Chen had been worth every penny. She had not just won my case. She had uncovered a criminal conspiracy that had victimized the entire neighborhood. I recommended her to several other homeowners who were dealing with HOA disputes, and she was building quite a reputation as a fearless advocate against HOA abuse. Detective Sarah Williams closed her investigation after Brenda's guilty plea, but she told me that my case had opened her eyes to HOA corruption. She had since worked on several other cases involving HOA board members who had abused their positions, and she had become something of a specialist in HOA-related crimes. As for Brenda herself, I occasionally wondered how she was doing in prison. I did not take any pleasure in her incarceration, but I did not feel sorry for her either. She had made her choices, and those choices had consequences. She had let power corrupt her, and she had hurt a lot of people along the way. Sometimes I thought about the woman she must have been before she became HOA president, before she let authority go to her head. But then I remembered how she had tried to blame me for an accident she caused, how she had sued me frivolously, how she had stolen from her neighbors, and any sympathy evaporated. The neighborhood held a summer block party that first year after Brenda's arrest, something that had not happened in years because Brenda had always found reasons to veto it. Tom organized it, and nearly every household showed up. There were grills smoking with burgers and hot dogs, kids running around playing games, and neighbors actually talking to each other and enjoying themselves. At one point during the party, an older gentleman named Walter Simmons approached me. He lived at the far end of the neighborhood, and I had only spoken to him a few times. "I want to thank you," Walter said, shaking my hand firmly. For what? I asked, genuinely confused, for standing up to that woman. She fined me $2,000 3 years ago because she said my fence was 6 inches over the property line. I hired a surveyor who proved she was wrong, but she refused to rescind the fine. I could not afford to fight her in court, so I just paid it to avoid having a lien on my house. When your lawsuit came out and all her crimes came to light, the new board refunded my money. But more than that, you showed everyone that we did not have to accept being bullied. I was touched. I had not realized that my fight against Brenda had had such a ripple effect. Over the course of the evening, 3 other neighbors approached me with similar stories. Brenda had been terrorizing the neighborhood for years, and nobody had felt empowered to fight back until I did. Lisa squeezed my hand as we walked home from the block party that evening. "You are a hero to these people," she said. I laughed. "I am not a hero. I just refuse to accept being blamed for something that was not my fault." "That is what makes you a hero," she insisted. "You stood up when it mattered." A lot of people would have just paid the fine and moved on to avoid the hassle. Maybe she was right. I did not think of myself as a hero, just a stubborn guy who did not like being pushed around. But if my stubbornness had helped other people, then maybe it had all been worth it. The years passed, and life in Maple Ridge settled into a comfortable rhythm. The HOA functioned the way it was supposed to, handling necessary maintenance and rule enforcement without becoming tyrannical. Tom served as president for 2 years before stepping down, and a woman named Jennifer Whitmore took over. She was fair and reasonable, and the neighborhood continued to thrive. Lisa and I got married in a small ceremony at a mountain resort outside of Denver. Tom was one of my groomsmen, and about half the neighborhood attended the wedding. It was a beautiful day, and as I stood at the altar watching Lisa walk down the aisle, I thought about how different my life might have been if I had just paid that first $500 fine. I would have avoided the lawsuits and the legal bills and the stress. But I also would have let a bully continue to terrorize my neighbors. I would have missed out on the friendships I had formed through the ordeal, and I would have missed the profound satisfaction of watching justice prevail. During our honeymoon in Italy, I told Lisa that I wanted to write down everything that had happened, not for publication, but just to have a record of it. She thought it was a great idea, so when we got back home, I spent several weeks writing out the whole story, from the moment I heard the crunch of splintering wood on that cold January morning to Brenda's arrest and conviction. Reading through it afterward, I was struck by how surreal the whole thing seemed. The idea that a HOA president would crash into someone's fence, blame them for it, sue them, and turn out to be a criminal embezzler sounded like the plot of a bad movie. But it had all really happened, every bizarre twist and turn. I kept the written account in a file on my computer, along with copies of all the legal documents, court filings, and correspondence. Occasionally, I would go back and read through it, partly to remind myself that it had really happened and partly to remember the lessons I had learned. The main lesson was simple. Bullies count on people being too afraid or too tired to fight back. They thrive on apathy and intimidation. But when someone stands up to them, they often crumble. Brenda had seemed so powerful and intimidating at the height of her reign as HOA president. But once her actions were exposed to sunlight, her house of cards collapsed. Another lesson was the importance of documentation. If I had not kept careful records of every violation notice, every email, every interaction with Brenda, my case would have been much harder to prove. The police report from the original accident was crucial. The recording of the HOA meeting was crucial. The financial records were crucial. Evidence matters, especially when you are up against someone who is willing to lie, and the final lesson was that you cannot do it alone. I had Lisa supporting me emotionally and providing legal guidance. I had Tom witnessing the accident and testifying on my behalf. I had Margaret Chen fighting for me in court. I had Gary Morrison finding the courage to tell the truth about the HOA finances. I had Detective Williams investigating Brenda's crimes. No individual could have brought Brenda down alone, but together we had been unstoppable. 5 years after the fence incident, I was promoted to senior project manager at the engineering firm where I worked. The promotion came with a significant raise, and Lisa and I started talking seriously about starting a family. We had been married for 3 years, and we both felt ready for the next chapter. One evening, I was working in the yard, planting some new shrubs along the rebuilt fence, when a car pulled up to the curb. A woman in her 30s got out, looking around at the houses as if searching for an address. "Can I help you?" I called out. She walked over to my fence. "Are you Yates Coleman?" "I am," I said, wiping dirt from my hands. "My name is Rachel Martinez," she said, holding out her hand. "I am a reporter with the Denver Post. I am working on a story about HOA corruption and abuse in Colorado, and your case keeps coming up in my research. I was wondering if you would be willing to talk to me about what happened." I was hesitant. The whole ordeal was behind me, and I was not sure I wanted to relive it for a newspaper article. But Rachel seemed earnest and professional. "What angle are you taking with the story?" I asked. "I am looking at how HOA boards can become corrupt and what legal protections exist for homeowners. Your case is interesting because you fought back successfully, and it led to criminal charges. A lot of homeowners in similar situations just give up because they cannot afford the legal fees or they are afraid of retaliation." I thought about Walter Simmons and the other neighbors who had thanked me for standing up to Brenda. If my story could help other people in similar situations, maybe it was worth sharing. "All right," I said. "Let me go inside and clean up and we can talk." Over the next hour, I told Rachel the whole story. She recorded our conversation with my permission and took notes. She asked thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely interested in the broader issues rather than just the sensational aspects of Brenda's crimes. The article came out 2 weeks later, running on the front page of the Sunday Denver Post. It was a comprehensive look at HOA problems in Colorado, featuring several case studies, including mine. Rachel had interviewed Margaret Chen, Judge Sullivan, and even Detective Williams. The article explained how HOA boards could abuse their power and what homeowners could do to protect themselves. The response was overwhelming. I received emails from people across Colorado thanking me for speaking out and sharing their own HOA horror stories. Margaret Chen's phone started ringing off the hook, with people seeking legal help with their HOA disputes. The article even prompted some state legislators to look at reforming Colorado HOA laws to provide better protections for homeowners. A few months after the article was published, I received a letter from an inmate at the Colorado Women's Correctional Facility. It was from Brenda Patterson. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened the envelope and unfolded the single sheet of lined paper inside. The letter was short and handwritten in Brenda's neat script. She did not apologize for crashing into my fence, or for suing me, or for fining me unjustly. Instead, she wrote about how prison had given her time to reflect on her life and her choices. She acknowledged that she had let power corrupt her and that she had hurt a lot of people. She said she was working with a therapist to understand why she had behaved the way she did. The last paragraph caught me off guard. She wrote, "I do not expect you to forgive me, and I am not asking you to. But I wanted you to know that what you did, standing up to me, was probably the best thing that could have happened." If you had not fought back, I would have continued down that path until I destroyed myself completely. Prison is hard, but it is better than living the lie I was living before. Thank you for being stronger than I was." I read the letter several times, trying to process it. It was not quite an apology, but it was an acknowledgement. I showed it to Lisa and we talked about it for a long time. "You think she means it?" Lisa asked. "I think she probably does," I said. "Or at least she thinks she does right now. Whether she will stay changed when she gets out, who knows?" I did not write back to Brenda. I did not think there was anything I could say that would be helpful or meaningful. I folded the letter, put it in the file with all the other documents from the case, and moved on with my life. Lisa got pregnant a year later, and we welcomed our son, Marcus, into the world on a beautiful spring day. Holding him in my arms at the hospital, I thought about the kind of world I wanted him to grow up in. I wanted him to learn to stand up for himself and others. I wanted him to understand that doing the right thing is not always easy, but it is always worth it. I wanted him to know that bullies only win if good people do nothing. Tom Martinez was the first neighbor to visit us after we brought Marcus home from the hospital. He brought a huge teddy bear and a card signed by half the neighborhood. "Kid is going to grow up in a good place," Tom said, looking at the sleeping baby. "Thanks to his dad making sure this neighborhood got cleaned up." I looked around at my home, my wife, my son, and my friends. The fence that had been destroyed was rebuilt and stronger than ever. The HOA that had been corrupt was now functional and fair. The neighborhood that had been ruled by fear was now a real community. It had all started with a crash on an icy morning, and my refusal to accept blame for something I did not do. It seemed like such a small thing in retrospect, standing up to an HOA fine. But that small act of defiance had cascaded into something much bigger, touching dozens of lives and exposing crimes that might otherwise have continued for years. As I sat on my porch that evening, watching the sun set over the Colorado mountains with my family inside, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. Not for the ordeal itself, which had been stressful and expensive, but for the lessons it had taught me and the good that had ultimately come from it. The fence was just a fence. It could be rebuilt, but integrity, once compromised, is much harder to restore. I was glad I had fought for mine, even when it would have been easier to just pay the fine and move on. And if Marcus ever asked me about why there was a framed HOA violation notice hanging in our garage, I would tell him the whole story. I would tell him about standing up to bullies, about the importance of documentation and evidence, about finding allies and support, and about how sometimes doing the right thing costs you money and time and stress, but it is worth it in the end, because that is the kind of man I wanted him to be. The kind who did not let bullies win. The kind who stood up for what was right, even when it was hard. The kind who understood that communities are built not just with homes and fences, but with integrity and courage. The fence in front of my house stood strong and solid, a testament to good craftsmanship and quality materials. But more than that, it was a symbol of resilience, of rebuilding after destruction, of refusing to let someone else's recklessness define you, and every time I looked at it, I smiled.